Today's story is about a guy who spent 4 years being the family fallback, the one who showed up, the one who wrote checks, the one who never said no, until he finally did. He gave his family $45,000 over 4 years, funded his brother's failed businesses, picked up their bills, kept showing up because that's what you do for family. Then his brother sued him for $200,000. His parents took a loan against their house to fund the lawsuit, and then they called to ask if he could maybe help cover the lawyer's retainer. The lawyer who was suing him. Stick around, this one earns it. My brother sued me, then demanded I pay his lawyer's fees. And my parents backed him up. So I made sure they regret it. My name's Cal. I'm 34. I'm a project manager at a civil engineering firm in Nashville. I own a house, I have a good wife, and up until about 18 months ago, I thought I had a family too. I grew up outside of Knoxville with my parents, Ruth and Walt, and my older brother Brett. Brett is 2 years ahead of me, and from the moment he could throw a football, he was the main event in our house. Quarterback, homecoming king, the kind of guy who walked into a room and made every adult within 50 feet start grinning like they'd just found a 20 in an old coat. I was the other one, the quiet kid who liked reading and building things in the garage, who kept his head down and got decent grades without anybody making a big deal out of it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I had some tragic childhood, because I didn't. My parents loved me. They fed me, showed up to enough of my stuff to not qualify as neglectful. But there was this unspoken understanding in our house. Brett was the main event, and I was the opening act nobody really came to see. When Brett scored a touchdown, the whole family drove 3 hours to watch. When I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, my mom said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to ironing his jersey. It wasn't cruelty, it was just gravity. Brett was the sun, and the rest of us orbited. After high school, Brett got a football scholarship to a mid-level state school. He blew out his knee sophomore year, dropped out, and came home. And instead of regrouping and figuring out a new plan, he just kind of stopped. Moved back in with my parents, picked up odd jobs, waited tables at a diner for a while, tried a brief stretch selling insurance that lasted exactly 11 days, but nothing stuck, and nobody in my family seemed to think that was a problem. Brett was figuring things out. He was 23 and playing video games in his childhood bedroom while my parents paid his car insurance. But sure, figuring things out. Meanwhile, I went to community college, transferred to UT, and graduated with a degree in civil engineering. It wasn't glamorous, but I worked for it. Got a job at a firm in Nashville, started at the bottom, and spent the next 8 years climbing. By 30, I was managing commercial builds worth millions. I bought a house. I met my wife Mara at a friend's cookout. She's an ER nurse, sharp as anything, funny, and the kind of person who can read a room faster than most people read a menu. We got married 2 years ago. Life was genuinely good. But here's the thing about being the successful sibling in a family that worships the unsuccessful one. You become the bank. Not officially. Nobody sits you down and explains it. It starts small. Mom needs help with a dental bill. Dad's truck needs a new transmission. Brett needs first and last month's rent because he's finally moving out, and could you just cover it this once? And you say yes because you love them. And honestly, you can afford it. Over about 4 years, I estimate I gave my family somewhere around $45,000. I didn't keep a running tab at first, because who does that with family? Mara did, though. She kept a spreadsheet, not because she's cold, but because she's an ER nurse and she documents everything. It's just in her DNA. When she first showed me the number, I genuinely thought she'd made an error. She hadn't. The thing that really got under my skin wasn't even the money. It was the attitude. Every time I helped, there was this energy like I owed them something. Like my success was communal property and I was being selfish for not sharing more freely. Brett especially had this move where every time I mentioned anything about my own life, new car, a vacation with Mara, a promotion at work, he'd go, "Must be nice." New car, must be nice. Vacation, must be nice. Some of us can't afford to leave the state. I let it slide for years. Mara kept telling me I was being a doormat. I kept telling her that's just how families work. She'd raise an eyebrow and say, "That's not how my family works." And I'd change the subject, because deep down I knew she was right. Hold on. Let me jump in for a second. For the listeners, this is the host talking, not the story. I need to point something out about Brett. This guy dropped out, bounced between jobs, burned through every dollar Cal gave him, and his entire personality contribution was, "must be nice," every time his brother accomplished something. That's not a rough patch. That's a lifestyle choice with bad lighting. Captain Participation Trophy never played the game, but wow, did he have opinions about the scoreboard? And the whole family just let it ride, for years. Cal, buddy, I love you, but you ignored more red flags than a colorblind bullfighter. Anyway, here's where it gets expensive. The breaking point started building about 18 months ago. Brett had gotten into flipping cars, buying junkers, fixing them up, selling them for a profit. On paper, not a bad idea. Brett's always been good with his hands. The problem was that his version of the business involved buying cars he couldn't afford to fix, storing them on property he didn't own, and then calling me when the whole thing inevitably fell apart. He burned through 3 separate ventures in about 10 months. After the third one collapsed, he called and asked for $15,000 to start fresh with a new batch of cars. I said no. First time in my adult life I told my brother no. And you would have thought I'd canceled Christmas. He went dead quiet on the phone for about 10 seconds, which, if you know Brett, is basically a geological era. And then he said, "So that's how it is. I'm not worth 15 grand to you." I tried to explain it wasn't about his worth. It was about the pattern, that I'd already given him tens of thousands of dollars and none of it had become anything. That I loved him, but I couldn't keep doing this. He hung up on me. Didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. Then I got the call that kicked off the strangest chapter of my life. It was my mom. She was using that voice she does when she's delivering news about a terminal diagnosis, all soft and careful. "Cal, honey, we need to talk. Brett's in a situation and he needs some help with legal fees." I asked what happened. Did he get into some kind of trouble? Did he hit someone? She paused. Then she said, "He's suing you, sweetheart. He says you owe him money from a business deal. He's already got a lawyer, but the lawyer needs a retainer and Brett can't cover it. We were hoping maybe you could help." I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the punchline. I actually laughed. Not a real laugh, more like the sound your brain makes when it's trying to reboot after a catastrophic error. My brother was suing me, and my family wanted me to pay for it. I told my mom I had to go and hung up. 3 days later, Brett's lawyer called me directly. That's when I realized this wasn't just Brett being dramatic. The man on the other end of the line was very real, very professional, and very serious. His name was Ward Finn, which honestly sounded exactly like a character from a legal thriller, which felt appropriate given that my life had apparently become one. He introduced himself, said he was representing my brother in a civil matter, and then hit me with the number. $200,000. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it like the device itself had betrayed me. Then I put it back and said, "I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?" He repeated it. $200,000 in damages for what he described as a verbal partnership agreement related to a car flipping business that Brett claimed I had financially backed and then abandoned, causing significant financial losses and I need you to hear this part, emotional distress. My brother, who had the emotional range of a ceiling fan, was claiming emotional distress. I told Ward there was no partnership, no agreement, and that every dollar I'd ever given Brett was a gift, not an investment. He said very politely that his client saw it differently and that I'd be receiving formal documentation within the week. Then he wished me a good evening and hung up. I sat in my home office for a long time after that. It was a Wednesday. Wait, no, it was Thursday. Whatever, doesn't matter. Mara found me there about an hour later, just staring at my desk like it had personally offended me. She asked what was wrong. When I told her, she didn't gasp or yell. She just closed her eyes, took a breath, and said, "I'm going to need you to tell me that again, but slower, because I want to make sure I'm furious about the right thing." I told her again. She was furious about the right thing. Here's what Brett's lawsuit actually claimed. He alleged that 2 years prior, when I'd given him $12,000 for his second car flip attempt, I had verbally agreed to be his business partner. That the money wasn't a gift but a capital investment. That I'd promised to keep funding the operation, and when I pulled out, I caused the business to fail, resulting in lost income, debt, and emotional distress. He wanted $200,000 to cover projected income plus damages. Anyone with a functioning brain could see this was nonsense. There was no partnership, no agreement. I'd given Brett money the same way you give a friend $20 when they forget their wallet at lunch. except I'd done it roughly 200 times, and the total came out to 45 grand. But Brett had found a lawyer willing to take the case. And in our legal system, that's all you need to make someone's life very uncomfortable. I called my parents the next day, hoping maybe they'd come to their senses. My dad answered. I asked if he knew what Brett was doing. He said he did. I asked if he thought it was reasonable. Long pause. Well, Cal, your brother feels like you made him a promise and broke it. He's hurting. I said, he's suing me for $200,000, Dad. I'm the one who should be hurting. My dad sighed like I was the unreasonable one. You've always had it easier than your brother, he said. You went to college, got the good job, married a wonderful girl. Brett didn't get those breaks. The least you could do is help him when he's down. The least I could do. Like I'd been sitting on a throne eating grapes while my brother suffered. Like my engineering degree fell out of the sky and landed in my lap. Like Mara showed up at my door with a bow on her head. Everything I had, I built. Late nights, missed weekends, years of grinding from zero. But in my family's eyes, I'd just gotten lucky. And Brett had gotten unlucky. And the universe owed him a correction that apparently had to come out of my bank account. I hung up on my dad. Second time in 1 week, I'd hung up on a family member. New personal record. Pause. This is me again, not Cal. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what his dad just pulled off there. The same man who watched his son fund the family for 4 years without a word of thanks just told him the real problem is he had it too easy. Cal built everything from scratch while Brett collected participation trophies and rent money. And somehow Cal's the lucky one. I want to introduce a term for this. Bankrupt dad logic. The kind where effort equals advantage and resentment equals debt. It's incredible. Anyway, it gets worse before it gets better. Stick with me. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and a low-grade dread that lived in my stomach like a stone. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Paige Hollis, who came recommended by a colleague at work. Paige was exactly what I needed. Calm, direct, and she had this way of explaining things that made the ground feel solid, even when everything else wasn't. She reviewed Brett's claim and told me in her professional opinion that it was legally creative. I learned later that's attorney speak for garbage that we still have to deal with. The problem, she explained, was that even a frivolous lawsuit costs money to defend. Even if Brett's case eventually got tossed, which she believed it would, I'd still be spending thousands on legal fees, discovery, depositions, court appearances. Ward Finn might be banking on me writing a check just to make the headache stop. File something outrageous. Bet the defendant wants out. Meanwhile, my family went into full pressure mode. My mom called 3 times in 1 week. Can't you just give him something? My aunt called to tell me I was tearing the family apart. My cousin sent a Facebook message saying I should be ashamed. Not one of them acknowledged that Brett was the one who filed the lawsuit. Every single finger pointed at me. Mara was my rock through all of it. She'd come home from 12-hour shifts and find me pacing the kitchen, and she'd sit me down and talk it through. She never said, "I told you so," and she had every right. But here's the part that really broke me. About a month into the legal mess, I found out how Brett was affording Ward Finn. My mom had taken out a home equity line of credit on my parents' house. My parents, who were both in their mid-60s and on a fixed income, had put their home on the line to fund my brother's lawsuit against me. When I found out, I drove over there. I sat at their kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework as a kid, where I'd blown out birthday candles. And I looked at my mother and said, "Mom, do you understand what you've done? If this case goes sideways, and it will, you could lose this house." She started crying. Not because she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. She cried because I was being mean to Brett. She said through tears that he deserved a chance to be heard, that he'd been struggling so long and nobody was helping him, that I had more than enough to share. I looked at my dad. He was staring at the table. He didn't say a word. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out. Sat in my truck in their driveway for a long time with the engine off, trying to figure out how I'd become the villain in a story where I was the only one who'd ever done anything for anyone. The return on 4 years of generosity was a lawsuit, and a family that thought I was selfish for not wanting to fund my own destruction. I turned the key and drove home. Mara was waiting on the porch when I pulled in. She took one look at my face and said, "That bad?" I nodded. She put her arm around me and walked me inside. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I was done being the family ATM, done being the bigger person, done absorbing everyone else's problems while they treated me like I was the problem. If Brett wanted a fight, I was going to give him one, just not the kind he expected. Wait. Hold on. His parents took a home equity loan against their retirement asset to fund a lawsuit against their other son, the son who gave them money for years. And when confronted about it, the mom cried about Brett's feelings. That is not helping Brett. That is setting your own house on fire and then complaining the smoke is getting in your eyes. Captain Participation Trophy couldn't afford his own legal revenge tour, so the family opened up the home equity line of credit. Incredible. Cal is done being the nice guy, and this is where things get really interesting. The weeks after I walked out were some of the loneliest of my life. I'd effectively cut off contact with my entire family. No calls, no texts, no Sunday dinners. My mom tried reaching out a few times, but every message was some version of, "This would all go away if you just helped Brett." So I stopped reading them. My dad sent exactly one text that said, "Call your mother." That was it. No, "How are you doing, son?" No, "I'm sorry this is happening to you." Just a directive to go comfort the people who were actively trying to take $200,000 from me. Father of the Year material right there. The isolation hit harder than I expected. I'd spent my whole life being the reliable one, the guy who showed up and fixed things. Suddenly, I wasn't showing up for anyone except Mara. And while she was more than enough, there was this hollow feeling in my chest that wouldn't quit. Like a room in my house had been emptied out overnight, and I kept walking past the open door and being surprised by it. Work became my lifeline. I threw myself into a massive mixed-use development downtown, the biggest project our firm had ever taken on. My boss, Knox, noticed the extra hours I was putting in and pulled me aside one afternoon. He said, "You're either running from something or running towards something. Either way, the work's been outstanding, so keep doing whatever you're doing." Knox wasn't the type to pry, but that small acknowledgement meant more to me than he probably knew. Mara, meanwhile, was quietly building our defense from home. Remember that spreadsheet? She pulled it out, organized every single transaction I'd ever made to my family, and started gathering documentation, bank statements, payment records, text messages where Brett had thanked me for helping out and never once mentioned a partnership. Voicemails from my mom asking for a little loan that was never paid back. Mara doesn't get angry and scream. She gets angry and builds a filing system. It's honestly terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Paige reviewed everything Mara had compiled, and her eyes went wide. "Your wife should be doing this professionally," she said. "This is more documentation than most people bring me in corporate disputes, let alone a family case." The text messages were particularly valuable because they showed a clear pattern. Gift after gift after gift, always framed as help, never as investment. Not a single text, email, or document anywhere suggesting a business partnership. Not one. Paige also did some digging on Wardfin. Turns out he primarily handled personal injury cases, the kind you see advertised on bus benches. He'd taken Brett's case on a modified contingency, meaning he'd get paid when and if they won or settled. That gave Ward a financial reason to push for a quick settlement rather than go to trial. File something outrageous. Bet the guy wants out fast. Paige's strategy was simple. Don't settle, don't blink, make them take it all the way to court where the case falls apart. I also hired a forensic accountant named Grant Weller, who my colleague Owen introduced me to. Grant was the kind of guy who found genuine joy in a well-organized spreadsheet. Detail-obsessed, slightly terrifying in the best possible way. I hired him to do a full financial analysis of Brett's car-flipping ventures. All three of them. He came back 2 weeks later with a 40-page report. Here's what it said. In the first venture, Brett purchased 3 vehicles with money I'd given him. He sold one at a loss, scrapped one, and the third was sitting in a storage lot racking up fees. Total loss to me, about $8,000. In the second venture, the one at the center of the lawsuit, Brett bought 5 vehicles. He fixed and sold 2 for a modest profit, maybe $3,000 total. But he'd spent most of the $12,000 I gave him, not on cars, but on personal expenses. A new television, a vacation to Myrtle Beach with his girlfriend at the time. And, I promise I am not making this up, a home brewing kit that he used exactly once. I found that detail on the receipt breakdown. One time. He used it one time. The remaining 3 cars were repossessed by the lot owner for unpaid storage fees. Grant concluded that even if I had given Brett the full $15,000 he'd asked for, there was no viable business model that would have generated the $200,000 in projected revenue he was claiming as damages. In Grant's exact words, the projected income figures in the plaintiff's claim bear no relationship to any reasonable financial reality. I read that line out loud to Mara. She laughed so hard she woke up Hank, our beagle, who'd been asleep on the couch and had definitely not consented to being startled. Okay, stop! For the listeners, this is the host again. Grant the forensic accountant just officially confirmed what we all already knew. The $200,000 number was completely made up. Not a rough estimate. Not an optimistic projection. Pure fiction. Brett spent $12 grand of his brother's money on a flat screen, a beach trip, and one home brewing experiment he tried a single time. And then filed a lawsuit for $200,000 in damages. That is not a business plan. That is a Fire Festival pitch delivered on a dollar store notepad. And Paige hasn't even played the good cards yet. Stay right here. About 8 months into the estrangement, I got a call from my cousin Nora out in Colorado. Nora was the one family member who'd never once asked me for anything. Younger, moved out west years ago, and was basically the black sheep of the extended family, which in retrospect probably meant she was the most well-adjusted one. She called to tell me things were getting rough back home. Brett's lawsuit was stalling. Ward Finn had apparently realized the case was weaker than Brett had represented and was getting cold feet. Meanwhile, my parents' finances were deteriorating. The home equity line was accumulating interest, and my mom had apparently started selling furniture to make the payments. Nora made it clear she wasn't calling to guilt me. I'm not telling you this because I think you should do anything about it, she said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's happening, and because nobody else in this family is being honest with you. I thanked her. I genuinely meant it. Honesty had become a rare thing. A few days after that first call, Nora reached back out with something else. Brett had called her, ranting and spiraling about how I was ruining his life. And in the middle of it, something slipped out. He told Nora that the whole lawsuit had been his girlfriend's idea. Not his previous girlfriend, a new one. A woman named Kala, who he'd been seeing about 6 months. According to Nora's account of the call, Kala had told Brett he was entitled to half of everything I had because I'd built my career on the back of family support, and that the money I'd given him proved we were partners and I owed him more. Nora said, Cal, I don't think Brett came up with this on his own. He can barely operate a microwave. I called Paige immediately. She was very interested. She did some research and found that Kala had a history. 2 prior civil suits, both against former partners, both alleging informal business arrangements that were never documented. One was dismissed. The other settled for a small amount. It was a pattern. She found men with access to money, and she weaponized the legal system to extract it. Paige was practically vibrating when she told me. Your brother isn't just an ungrateful sibling, she said. He's being manipulated by someone who does this professionally, and I can prove it. She drafted an amended filing that included Kala's litigation history and Brett's admission to Nora. Nora agreed to provide a sworn statement. My cousin, the one honest person in the whole family, was about to help bring the whole thing down. This was also around the time Paige gave me the option I'd been waiting for. We had enough, she said, not just to win Brett's case, but to file a countersuit. Abuse of process. Reimbursement for all legal fees I'd incurred defending against his claim, plus damages for the time, stress, and professional disruption. Total, we were seeking $85,000. Not Brett's fantasy number. A real, documented, defensible amount based on actual costs and actual harm. She also included something I hadn't thought of on my own. A full accounting of every dollar I'd ever given my family, all $45,000 of it, framed as relevant context to establish the long-standing pattern of financial support that Brett had exploited and then weaponized. She wasn't technically asking for it back, but she was making absolutely sure the court understood exactly who had been generous and who had been ungrateful. It was surgical. It was devastating. I went home and told Mara. She was on the couch with a coffee, Hank draped across her lap like a furry throw blanket. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I think your brother started a fire in your front yard and then complained that the smoke was bothering him. I think it's time you let him feel the heat. That was all I needed. I told Paige to file the countersuit. The day it was filed, my mom called before sundown. Hysterical. Cal, what are you doing? You're going to destroy your brother. You're going to destroy this family. I kept my voice calm. Mom, Brett sued me. He filed a lawsuit claiming I owed him $200,000. I didn't start this, but I'm going to finish it. But he's your brother, she said, like that was a legal argument. And I'm your son, I said. But that didn't stop you from taking a loan against your house to help him come after me. So I think we're past the point where family titles mean much, don't you? She didn't have an answer. She just cried and hung up. I felt something twist in my gut, but I knew the difference between guilt and grief. What I was feeling was grief. Grief for the family I wished I'd had. Grief for a version of my mom who would have told Brett he was wrong and to knock it off. That version didn't exist, and I needed to stop mourning her. Hold on a minute, because I need to talk about Calla for a second. This woman showed up, looked at a grown man who was already bitter and already resentful, and said, essentially, "You're right. Your successful brother owes you everything. Let's litigate that." 2 prior lawsuits. Same structure every time. No documentation. Push for a quick settlement. That is not a relationship. That is a business model with a better backstory. She found men with access to money and turned their resentment into a revenue stream. And Brett grabbed onto it because it was easier than looking in the mirror. Anyway, the deposition is next, and Paige had a gift waiting for Calla. The deposition was held at Paige's firm, a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long oak table. I arrived early, navy suit, feeling ready in a way I hadn't expected. Brett showed up 15 minutes late. He looked rough, not dramatically so, just in the way that someone looks when they've been making bad decisions for a long time and the bill is finally coming due. His clothes didn't fit right. He walked in with Ward Finn, who looked like a man who deeply regretted getting out of bed that morning. And then there was Calla. I was seeing her in person for the first time, polished, sharp-eyed, and she had that quality where she catalogs everything in a room within the first few seconds. She wasn't there as a legal party. She was there as moral support. Paige noticed her immediately, said nothing, just filed it away. Ward started with me, trying to establish that I'd been involved in Brett's business decisions, attended meetings, given input on inventory, reviewed business plans. I answered each question honestly. No, I never attended a meeting. No, I never gave input on which cars to buy. No, I never saw a business plan because there wasn't one. Yes, I gave Brett money. No, it was not an investment. It was a gift. Every time Ward pushed for an angle, "Isn't it true that you told your brother you believed in what he was doing?" I held the line. I probably said something like that, I told him. The same way you tell a friend their new haircut looks good even when it doesn't. That's called being supportive. It's not a contract. I saw Paige suppress a smile. Then Paige took over. She walked Brett through every dollar I'd ever given him, 45,000 laid out transaction by transaction, and asked him to identify which payments were investments and which were gifts. He stumbled, said they were a mix. She asked him to be specific. He couldn't. She showed him his own text messages, the ones where he'd written, "Thanks for helping me out, bro," and "I really appreciate the loan, I'll pay you back when I can." She asked if those sounded like the words of a business partner or a family member receiving help. "I don't know, it's just how I talk," Brett said. "Right," Paige said quietly. "You talk like someone who received gifts, because that's what they were." She moved on to Grant's forensic report. She walked Brett through the finances of each venture and watched him try to explain how a business that lost money on 2 out of 3 attempts was somehow going to generate $200,000 in profit. He couldn't explain it. He kept looking at Calla in the back of the room. She sat with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. Then Paige played her final card. She presented Calla's litigation history, didn't accuse anyone of anything directly, just laid out the facts. 2 prior lawsuits with nearly identical structures, informal business claims, no documentation, demands for fast settlements. She asked Brett if he was aware of this. He blinked. "I don't know what you're talking about." Paige said calmly, "I'm asking if you knew that the woman who suggested you file this lawsuit has done the exact same thing twice before with 2 other men." The room went very quiet. Ward shifted in his chair. Calla stood up. "This is irrelevant. I'm not a party to this case." Paige didn't even look at her. "You're right, you're not. But your influence on my client's brother is documented, and it's part of the pattern we intend to present to the court." Calla walked out. Brett watched her go, and for the first time since this whole mess started, he looked scared. Not angry, not defiant. Scared. Like a kid who just realized the person he'd been following didn't actually know the way home. The deposition wrapped about an hour later. Ward asked for a recess, and then asked to speak with Paige privately. I waited in the lobby with Mara, who'd taken the day off to be there. She held my hand and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Paige came out 20 minutes later doing that thing where she's clearly excited, but holding the professional composure together by a thread. She sat across from us and said, "Ward wants to settle." I raised an eyebrow. "Their side wants to settle?" "More accurately," she said, "Ward wants to withdraw. He's told Brett he doesn't believe the case is winnable, and he's recommending they drop it entirely. Brett's resisting, but Ward is done. He's withdrawing his counsel." I asked about the countersuit. That's the interesting part. Ward knows if we proceed with the countersuit, Brett's going to owe you money he doesn't have. He suggested a resolution. Brett drops his suit. We drop ours. Clean break. I sat with that for a moment. Mara squeezed my hand. I looked at Paige and said, "No." Both women looked at me. I've spent over $30,000 defending myself against a lawsuit that never should have been filed. I spent $45,000 over 4 years supporting a family that repaid me by funding my brother's legal attack on me. I'm not walking away clean. I want my legal fees recovered. Every cent. Paige nodded. I can make that happen. And she did. Final update. The resolution came 3 weeks later. Brett dropped his lawsuit. In exchange for us dropping the countersuit, he agreed to a structured repayment of my legal fees, roughly $32,000, paid over 4 years. It was put in writing, signed by both parties, and filed with the court. If he missed a payment, I could reinstate the countersuit with interest. Paige made sure of that. But the money wasn't the real payoff. Calla disappeared from Brett's life within days of the deposition, presumably moved on to find her next target. Without her in his ear, Brett went through a period of what I can only describe as painful clarity. It took some time. But about 3 months after the settlement, I got a letter in the mail. Not a text, not a voicemail. A handwritten letter. 2 pages, written in that messy handwriting I remembered from when we were kids doing homework at that same kitchen table. He didn't make excuses. He said he was ashamed. He said he'd spent so long being jealous of me that he'd convinced himself I owed him something. And when someone came along and told him that belief was justified, he grabbed onto it because it was easier than admitting his problems were his own. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted me to know he was sorry. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it up and put it in my desk drawer. I haven't forgiven Brett. Not fully. Forgiveness isn't a light switch, and some things take time. But I did respond. I sent him a short note that said I'd read his letter. I appreciated the honesty, and that the door wasn't closed, but it was going to stay mostly shut for a while. He respected that. My parents are a different story. My mom eventually called to apologize. Sort of. One of those apologies that's really just a renegotiation. "I'm sorry things got so out of hand, but we were just trying to help Brett." I told her I loved her, but I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. We talk occasionally now. Short calls, surface-level stuff. My dad still hasn't said anything. I don't think he ever will. As for me, I'm doing well. Mara and I bought a bigger house last spring, a Craftsman with a wraparound porch she fell in love with the second she saw it. I made senior partner at the firm. Hank is still the laziest beagle in North America. Nora came to visit last month and spent the whole weekend laughing with Mara about things I wasn't supposed to hear. Owen and Becca, our neighbor June next door, the softball guys on weekends. A whole community built by choice, not obligation. That's new for me. Brett's making his payments on time every month. Got a steady job at an auto body shop, and from what Nora tells me, he's actually pretty good at it when he's not trying to be an entrepreneur. Maybe one day we'll sit on my porch and laugh about all of this. Maybe we won't. That part's still open. But either way, I'm nobody's ATM. I'm nobody's backup plan. And if anyone tries to sue me again, I've got a wife with a spreadsheet, a lawyer with a backbone, and a forensic accountant who finds genuine joy in destroying bad math. I think I'll be fine. So, what would you have done? Would you have taken the clean break when Ward offered it, or gone for the fees like Cal did? Drop it in the comments. Look, I'll be straight. Cal let this go way too long. 45 grand handed over with no real conversation about expectations. That's on him, and he'd probably say the same. But the moment he finally said no, that was the whole game. Saying no doesn't mean you hate your brother. It means you respect yourself enough to stop handing someone a lighter and wondering why your stuff keeps catching fire. His family tried to guilt him into funding his own destruction. He just didn't. Drop your take in the comments. Who was the real villain here? And if you're not subscribed, hit that button. New stories every day. Every day. Every day. Every day. Every day.